Welcome to the Thinking Stack.
Great to be here.
Today, we're wading into some really complex territory, Kashmir. And this isn't about picking sides or going over old arguments.
No, not at all. We're actually using a framework, the Integrated Thinking Stack, or ITS, to really dissect the risks.
Yeah.
And importantly, the resilience there.
Right. It's like running a diagnostic, looking at the information we have, seeing where the potential breaking points are, but also where unexpected strengths might lie.
Exactly. We've got some material here that sort of puts the dynamics on a crash test sled, metaphorically speaking. We'll be stress testing some common beliefs.
Beliefs that might be deeply held, I imagine.
For sure. And the goal isn't simple answers, frankly. There probably aren't any here. It's more about understanding the underlying forces. What are the flashpoints? And what sources of stability might we be overlooking?
Okay, let's get started then. First up, we're doing what we call an assumption autopsy, taking apart some core beliefs about Kashmir. The first one, nuclear weapons keep the peace. It sounds plausible on the surface, but the stress test question is, what if political events just move way faster than our crisis communication channels can handle?
That's the crucial point. I mean, look at the Balakot incident in 2019, that whole dogfight situation. It unfolded in less than 36 hours from the initial strikes.
Less than 36 hours. Wow.
Yeah. And if you think about the Stimson escalation ladder, it outlines about, 11 steps between a minor skirmish and actual tactical nuclear use?
11 steps.
So 11 steps, but only 36 hours to potentially climb them? That's a compressed time frame.
Yeah.
Dangerously so.
It really shrinks that decision window, doesn't it? So if this assumption that nukes guarantee peace turns out to be flawed in this specific context, what's the potential fallout?
Well, the analysis suggests a risk, maybe not a huge one, but a real risk of a limited conflict. Maybe, say, a 7-day war involving low yield, like 1 to 3 kiloton battlefield nukes.
That's sobering. So the weapons don't automatically prevent war? They just raise the stakes if one starts.
Precisely. Especially when things escalate that quickly.
Okay, assumption number 2. More GDP equals less insurgency.
Seems logical, right? Economic opportunity should reduce conflict.
It does seem logical. But the stress test is, how does that big jump in tourism we've seen compare with potential upticks in violence or terrorism?
Right, because we saw huge tourist numbers, didn't we? We got 1.8 million in 2023.
Exactly, a big number. But then you have reports like mentioning 26 tourists killed in April 2025.
26, yeah, that definitely complicates the simple GDP causes peace narrative.
It does.
So if we're wrong about that assumption, what's the risk? What's the potential consequence?
It suggests that economic growth might not be the silver bullet. It could even potentially exacerbate grievances if the benefits aren't seen as being shared fairly, or if the root causes go deeper than just economics.
So growth isn't inherently stabilizing, it depends how it happens.
Exactly, it's more complex. Okay, let's pivot to the environment. Assumption 3. The Indus Treaty is climate-proof. This feels critical given how vital water is.
Absolutely vital. And the stress test here is pretty straightforward. What happens with accelerating glacial melt and, increasingly unpredictable rainfall?
Because the treaty itself, it wasn't really designed with modern climate change in mind, was it?
Not really. A CSIS audit highlighted that it actually lacks specific clauses for dealing with major changes in water flow, significant variability.
And the climate models.
They're predicting something like a 35% loss in glacial melt by 2050.
35%. Okay, that's huge. So if the treaty isn't ready for that kind of shock, what's the potential consequence?
The nightmare scenario is a collapse of Pakistan's irrigation system, which is heavily dependent on the Indus Basin.
Which would inevitably lead to massive internal pressure.
Right. Calls to scrap the treaty, blaming India. It could very easily trigger what some analysts call the hydro saber loop, where water disputes fuel military tensions.
So an environmental stressor becomes a major geopolitical flashpoint.
Correctly.
Okay, final assumption for this autopsy. AFSPA is tactically non-negotiable. That's the Armed Forces Special Powers Act.
Yes, a very sensitive topic.
The stress test question here is, could a limited, perhaps carefully managed rollback of AFSPA actually improve intelligence gathering counterintuitively?
It's a really interesting question.
Yeah.
And there's a data point from an experiment in Handwara back in 2022, sort of a sandbox trial.
What happened there?
According to an internal brief, after they partially lifted the immunity provisions in that specific area, tips from civilians actually went up. by 34%.
34%, that's
Yep.
quite something. It really pushes back against the idea that you need total immunity for operational effectiveness.
It certainly suggests a different dynamic might be possible.
So if the assumption that AFSPA is absolutely non-negotiable, even in part, is wrong, what are the implications?
Well, the thinking is that sticking rigidly to the current broad application might actually increase alienation, potentially boosting insurgent support over the long run.
Whereas a limited rollback
Might, as Hanwara suggests, build trust, improve intelligence flow, and actually reduce support for insurgents. It challenges that conventional wisdom about security measures.
Fascinating. Okay, so we've stress tested some core beliefs. Now let's look ahead. We've got some potential scenarios for the 2025-2030 timeframe.
Right. These came out of a Delphi panel 8 South Asia analysts polled in April 2025.
Yeah.
They assigned probabilities and potential impacts.
Okay, scenario 1, hot summer water duel. Probability 0.18, but a high impact score of 9. Sounds serious. What drives this?
Water scarcity, basically. Imagine a 30% water flow deficit in the Indus Basin hitting right during sensitive election periods in India or Pakistan.
Recipe for tension.
Absolutely. Water stress plus political opportunism.
Okay, scenario 2, urban drone apocalypse. Lower probability 0.12, but still a high impact of 8. That sounds pretty grim.
It pictures militant groups, maybe late or JAM, adapting tactics, using commercially available quad drones, fitting them with IEDs, and targeting crowded urban areas. The Delhi metro was mentioned as a potential target.
Wow, using readily available tech for high-impact attacks.
That's the evolving threat landscape.
Scenario 3, silent panopticon. This one has the highest probability, 0.26 with an impact of 6. What's this about?
This involves the increasing use of advanced surveillance AI, LiDAR, facial recognition.
Okay.
The scenario suggests this might effectively suppress visible protests, create a kind of surface calm, but it wouldn't address the underlying trauma or grievances, just push them underground.
So pacification without reconciliation. A fragile peace.
Potentially, yes, a silent resentment.
Next, twin return plan. Probability 0.20, impact 4. What does this involve?
This describes a scenario with a managed resettlement program for displaced Kashmiri Pandits running alongside a freeze on current domicile rules.
Highly sensitive, politically and socially.
Extremely. Big potential for friction over demographics and rights.
And the last one, green pivot. Lowest probability 0.07, but a decent impact score of 7. This sounds more positive.
It is. It envisions India, Pakistan, maybe even China, actually cooperating on climate change, setting up a joint climate task force, perhaps facilitated by the World Bank.
Using a shared threat to build cooperation. Interesting.
The potential, if less likely, pathway.
Now, these scenarios, these risks, they don't happen in isolation, do they? Let's talk about how they can interact. Loops under stress, we're calling it.
Exactly. The hot summer water duel is a good example to trace through.
Okay, walk us through it.
So imagine the Chenab River's flow drops significantly, say, below 450 cubic meters per second for 3 weeks straight.
Right.
Hydrology models suggest that could cause maybe a 12% drop in agricultural output in Pakistan's Punjab province.
Which would lead to?
Farmer unrest, potentially significant unrest. And Islamabad might then publicly blame Delhi for water theft, maybe even authorize increased infiltration across the line of control.
Okay, so that's the Hydro-Saber loop, kicking in water stress, fueling conflict behavior.
Precisely. Then, maybe Delhi responds by mobilizing forces, say, Gorvi Corps. At the same time, perhaps China decides to apply pressure up in Ladakh.
A multi-front pressure cooker.
Exactly. And now you've got the narrative loop spinning both sides, pushing their story hard. And the security alienation loop, more troops, more restrictions, potentially alienating the local Kashmiri population further.
So all 3 loops firing at once.
Yes, what the analysis calls a dangerous 3-loop resonance. It's a systemic crisis where different pressures amplify each other. Very hard to de-escalate.
That does paint a concerning picture. So are there things we could watch for? Early warnings that these stresses are building? Our early warning dashboard?
Yes, the analysis identified a few key indicators. If 2 or more of these trip together, it suggests a greater than 50% chance of significant unrest within about 6 months.
Okay, what's the first indicator?
Internet connectivity. If the NetBlock score drops below 10% for 48 hours straight,
What does that signal?
it pings both the security alienation loop, then communication blackouts, restrictions, and the narrative loop, suggesting information control.
Makes sense. What's number 2?
Google Trends. Specifically, watching search interest for terms like water theft in Punjab and Sindh in Pakistan.
Right.
If that spikes, say, by a factor of 5 over the baseline.
That signals the hydro loop is heating up. Public anxiety and blame focusing on water.
Exactly. Heightened public concern.
Indicator 3.
Ceasefire violations along the Losky, if they exceed 20 incidents in a 48-hour period.
Which loops does that ping?
Security alienation, obviously, showing a breakdown in basic stability, but potentially also the hydro loop, as border tensions often flare up alongside resource stress.
Okay. And the final indicator?
Graduate unemployment. If data from the Center for Monitoring Indian Economy shows it exceeding 28% in the region.
Why is that significant?
It hits both security alienation, the lack of opportunity breeds frustration, and the narrative loop, because it provides a powerful grievance for various groups to exploit.
Right. So 2 of those 4 flashing reds suggests a high probability of trouble ahead.
That's the threshold identified, yes.
Okay, this all sounds quite risk-focused, but it's not all doom and gloom, is it? We also looked at resilience assets, things already present that help the region cope.
Absolutely crucial. There are real strengths often overlooked. Take, for example, women-run dairy cooperatives in places like Kupwara.
What's special about them?
Their income is diversified, and their membership often crosses traditional community lines. During the 2020 lockdown, they actually increased profits by 9%. That shows anti-fragility. They got stronger under stress.
Through diversification and social cohesion. Great example. What else?
There's work on snowmelt microponds in areas like Neelam and Patter. These are local water buffers.
Ah, small-scale water management.
Exactly. Run locally, often using shared data via simple APIs. Pilot programs showed they reduced spring flood peaks by about 15%. It's a great example of polycentric water management, decentralized, adaptable.
Very practical. Are there financial examples too?
Yes, diaspora impact bonds. These are interesting. They're designed so that investment flows in when violence increases, because the yields go up then.
Counter-cyclical funding.
Right. The first one, about 6 crore rupees, funded an artisan co-op in 2024. And it was oversubscribed. It shows potential for bringing in capital precisely when it's needed most.
And finally, something about mentorship.
Trauma peer mentors. This involves ex-combatants mentoring others, helping them avoid relapsing into militancy.
Does it work?
The data suggests it does. A police rehab unit study showed a relapse rate under 5% for mentored individuals, compared to 18% in a control group. It highlights the power of local trust in rehabilitation.
Okay, so these assets exist. How can we build on them? What are the anti-fragility levers, ways to amplify this resilience?
We'll first expand those polycentric water buffers. Scale up the micropond networks to cushion against bigger water shocks.
Makes sense. Build on what works. Second lever.
A rotational AFSPA sunset. The idea is maybe specific military units rotate out of AFSPA immunity for set periods.
To incentivize what?
Building community trust and intelligence. If they don't have blanket immunity for a time, they're more reliant on good local relationships.
Interesting concept. Third lever.
Focus on diaspora-funded mixed cooperatives. Encourage and fund co-ops that intentionally bring together people from different communities, different religious backgrounds.
Using shared economic interests to counter division.
Precisely. Create economic facts on the ground that undermine divisive narratives.
And the last lever.
Integrating a trauma-informed curriculum in schools. Helping young people understand and manage trauma could make them less vulnerable to recruitment later on. Building psychological resilience from a young age.
Building resilience from the ground up. Okay, so wrapping this all up, we have what you call knife-edge insights. Crucial, maybe uncomfortable takeaways.
Yeah, truths that emerge from looking at the whole system.
What's the first one?
A pellet today is a recruitment coupon tomorrow.
Stark, meaning?
Meaning short-term security actions can have long-term blowback. Actions taken now create the grievances of the future, fueling the cycle of violence.
Right. Second insight.
The Indus Treaty is legacy software on climate crash, hardware patch, or perish.
A tech metaphor for the water crisis.
Basically, yeah. The treaty framework is old, designed for a different era. It desperately needs updating for the reality of climate change, or it risks failing catastrophically.
And the final knife-edge insight.
Risk isn't removed, it's relocated. Ignore one loop, it pops in another.
Ah, the systemic view again. You can't just solve one piece in isolation.
Exactly. Trying to clamp down on one problem without understanding the interconnections just shifts the pressure elsewhere. The risk finds another outlet.
So as we bring this analysis together, it's clear Kashmir is incredibly complex. It's this weave of environment, politics, economics, deep social issues.
And they're not separate problems. They're these interconnected loops, as we've discussed. They can spiral down, or potentially, with the right approach, move towards stability.
And that focus on resilience seems key. Not just bouncing back, but learning, adapting, growing stronger from shocks.
Yes. And the examples are the women's co-ops, the micropawns, the diaspora bombs, the peer mentors. There's inherent ingenuity and strength to build on.
So ultimately, getting a handle on the risks, nurturing these resilient, anti-fragile elements, it requires a different way of thinking, doesn't it?
It really does. Moving past simplistic fixes, trying to grasp the underlying systems.
Maybe the path to a more stable future isn't just about managing the conflict, but actively cultivating those seeds of resilience that are already there.
That's certainly a possibility worth considering deeply.
A question to hold on to as you, the listener, continue to process this incredibly complex landscape. Thanks for joining us on The Thinking Stack.